Dear students, hope you're fine. In my last video on environmental impact assessment, I could not complete all the points that I've studied about different countries, about some global view of environmental impact assessment. So I have discussed certain portions about certain countries, but certain other countries out within my study was left untouched, not discussed. So in the second part of this video, part two, video part two, I'll be including those countries, but at the same time, that is in 1 minute go from the beginning, which I've already included in my first video. Let me go very fast, whatever I discussed in the first video, and then I'll concentrate on the portions which I have not discussed as yet. So I told you that environmental impact assessment, it means that it's an assessment of environmental consequences of any plan, policy, or program before taking the decision, and after you assess the consequences, and after that you take the decision, and that is environmental impact assessment. There's a part of environmental accounting, and there are two actually environmental impact assessment. When it is in case of individual or companies, is known as environmental impact assessment, but when it is in case of government organs, it's said environmental strategic environmental assessment. But whatever may be, it's an assessment of the environmental issues, assessment of the impact of the environment on the economy, or impact of the economy on the environment. And after this assessment, you decide whether or not to proceed with a particular project. I had also defined you the definition of environmental impact assessment. It is the process of identifying, predicting, evaluating, mitigating the biophysical, social, and other relevant effects of development proposals prior to major decisions being taken and commitments made. So before you take some major decision, before you make some commitment, then you go for identification, predicting, and evaluating and mitigating the issues in connection with biophysical, social, and other effects of the developmental projects. Before you take any development project, you go for environmental impact assessment. So that I discussed in the earlier video, and there's a history that since 1960 only this too much alertness has been developed in various countries about environmental issues and assessment of the environmental impact. And in USA, actually, the act was passed, National Environmental Policy Act (NEPA) in 1969, and after that, most of the countries became alert about passing the environmental issues, environmental acts, and they went for environmental impact assessment. So I studied about some global overview of environmental impact assessment. So around the world, I've studied different countries. Those will be touching and going off. I studied about what is going on in Australia, and mainly after USA passed environmental NEPA. You know, NEPA, I told you, National Environmental Protection Act in USA. Then Australia also became alert, and they also started passing the different laws. And like New South Wales, Australia, their pollution state pollution control commission, they issued environmental impact assessment guidelines in 1974, and thereafter there was several acts in Australia, like environment protection and biodiversity conservation act of 1999, and several other acts were passed. The main focus area in Australia is about important flora, fauna, and ecological communities and heritage places. So these are the things of main focus in Australia in connection with environmental issues, environmental impact study. And there are also other points which bears a lot of significance, like world heritage properties, national heritage properties, wetlands, listed threatened species and ecological communities, and migratory species, Commonwealth marines, Commonwealth marine areas, then Great Barrier of Reef Marine Park, nuclear actions, water resources, all these things are taken into consideration in Australia, in different states of Australia also. Several acts are there, like in Queensland, I told you there are Integrated Planning 1997, then Environmental Protection Act 1994. All these things are there in Queensland, and in Northern Territory also Environmental Assessment Act. I'm going it very shortly. These things, and then Tasmania, several acts have been passed for environmental protection, and in Victoria there is an act, Environmental Effect Act of 1978, and in Western Australia also Environmental Protection Act of 1986. These things have been passed there. Then in Canada, you just focus Supreme Court of Canada. They defined according to them environmental issues. What are these respect to environmental matters? They say environmental impact assessment is in its simplest form a planning that tool that is now generally regarded as an integral component of sound decision making. So whenever there is sound decision making, you have to go for environmental impact assessment. Then there is Canadian Environmental Assessment Act of 1995. Then Environmental Impact Assessment Law is there. Environmental Protection Bureau is there. In China, I discussed there are also several laws to protect the environment to go for assessment. Then there is State Environmental Protection Administration (SEPA), which actually held just capped in halt 30 projects in 2004 because they did not comply with environmental laws. And these things are in every country because this assessment is possible, and this assessment is done through different enactments, different laws, different acts in every country. And the main focus is that there should not be any environmental hazard. There should not be any loss to environment, because environment actually most important thing for all over the world, all over the globe. In Egypt also, there's Ministry of State Environmental Affairs. They are conducting the environmental issues in Egypt, and there is Egyptian Environmental Affairs Agency, and they are taking responsibility of environmental impact assessment services. And in Egypt, there are also environmental natural resources, including human health project against uncontrolled development. They say that there should not be uncontrolled development because human health should be given prime importance, and without compromising the future generation ability to meet their needs. It should not compromise with the future generation. Then only you can go for some construction and whatever developmental works. In European Union also, there are some rules which are mandatory and some are discretionary, and some are mandatory, some are discretionary because there are a lot of members in the European nations, and there is strategic environmental assessment C in European nation. And most important thing, there are some key areas in uh, European environmental issues like European Union under EU directive. A compliant environmental impact assessment must provide certain information in these areas. So what are the issues should be included? Description of the project, description of the actual project, breakup of the project into several parts like construction, operation, etc., and decommissioning. Then all these things have to be analyzed from the point of view of air pollution, noise, and hydrology. And there are alternative methods, alternatives, if any, they have to be included. Examine the alternatives that have been considered. All these things are taken into consideration European Union. Then in United States of America also, I told you about NIPA, and I've already explained in Netherlands also there are several laws passed to protect the environment and to deal with the environmental issues. In United Kingdom, there is Town Country Planning Environmental Impact Assessment Regulation 2017. Come to Hong Kong. There is, in Hong Kong, there is Environmental Impact Assessment Ordinance in 1997, which became effective from 1998 for protection of environment and deal with environmental issues. In April 2011, Environmental Impact Assessment of Hong Kong section of Hong Kong, Guwahati Macau Bridge was found to have been breached the ordinance, so it was declared unlawful. So in every country, this types of assessment is there. The person who starts the project, he has to do some assessment, but above him there is a state laws, the laws of the national level. These laws have to assess, and after that they give the certificate to continue the work. In Iraq, there is a Ministry of Environment. They conduct the environmental issues, and the projects are divided into three categories like A, B, and C categories, and they conduct these issues. And come to India, Ministry of Environmental, Forest and Climate Changes in India has been a great effort in environmental impact assessment in India. So remember, there's a Ministry of Environmental, Forest and Climate Changes, and there are some main laws. Several laws are there. You should have to study, but I've taken here only few laws. Like in India, it's Water Act 1974, Indian Wildlife Protection Act 1972, the Air Prevention Control Pollution Act 1981, then Environmental Protection Act 1986, Biological Diversity Act 2002. All these acts are there in India to protect the environment and to deal with the environmental issues in this country. And there is most important responsible body in India is Central Pollution Control Board. The environmental impact assessment studies need a significant amount of primary and secondary data, correct? But there are some problems. You need primary data regarding air quality, water quality, all these things you need as primary data, and secondary data you need also for this environmental research, and which come out for several years records. But there are certain problems in India, like primary data and secondary data, because without primary data and secondary data being accurate and authentic, you cannot make the research. So these issues are there in India. In many environmental impact assessment studies, secondary data needs could be as high as 80% of the total data requirement. So you see, in India, secondary data are mostly 80% occupying the position in the research, but primary data is lacking in this because the environmental impact assessment experience in India indicate that lack of timely and availability of reliable and authentic environmental data has been a major bottleneck in achieving the full benefit of environmental impact assessment in India. So there's a problem of getting the primary data in India regarding environment, and these data are limited for only few months only. So there's some problem in the ultimate environment impact assessment. And this is a multidisciplinary subject. You remember, a multitude of agencies are involved in India for collection of environmental data, but it has been found that the proper data, correct data, authentic data are not always available. Environmental data is not always available, and that's a problem in India. And there are some issues also. In 2020, there was one draft act made by India, and several environmental groups opposed these things, this draft. And there are some oppositions also. Whenever government does something for the construction, then there are opposition groups, some NGOs coming to stand in the way to create troubles. These things are also issues. These are matters of study, matters of research. And then come to Malaysia. In Malaysia, there is the Environmental Quality Act of 1974. And this act requires development that have significant impact on the environment are required to conduct environmental impact assessment. So remember, in Malaysia also there are acts, and one particular act is Environmental Quality Act 1974. In Nepal, there are lots of environmental issues like earthquakes and all. And in Nepal also several acts have been passed in the 5-year plans, and these acts are controlling the environmental issues in Nepal. In the planning history of Nepal, the sixth plan 1980 to 85 for the first time recognized the need of environmental impact assessment. For the first time in the sixth plan 1980 to 85, Nepal realized the importance of environmental impact assessment, and they established environmental impact study project under the Department of Soil Conservation in 1982 during the sixth plan to develop the necessary instruments for integration of environmental impact assessment in infrastructure development projects. So in Nepal also, whenever there are the question of infrastructure development projects, they bring the environmental issues there, and this has to be because without the caring, without giving importance to environmental issues, one should not go for infrastructure developmental projects because there may be problem in the future. So the first time in the sixth plan, 1980 to 85 in Nepal, the first time recognized the need of environmental impact assessment. And however, government of Nepal enunciated environmental conservation related policies in the seventh plan only. Environmental policies came in seventh plan in 1985 to 1990, but the realization came in the sixth plan in Nepal that we should do something for the environment, and before going for any before going for any infrastructural developmental issues, we must go for environmental impact assessment. So dear students, you find that in every country, there is some realization that impact of the project should be assessed first, impact of the decision, impact of the developmental work, impact of the construction work should be assessed. That is from the point of view of the environment. So that is known as environmental impact assessment. And after this is properly assessed, only then one should decide whether to continue, whether to start the project or not. So these things in every country, I'm trying to tell you that in every country these issues are there. And the main thing, see, after studying Nepal, I found that their main issue is to avoid and minimize diverse effects on the ecological system. So this is a common thing that different terminology is used in different countries, but every country is doing this environmental impact issues, impact assessment in some form or the other. So this in Nepal, one more point I've noted here is emphasis the environmental impact assessment of this. See, they have listed these items, and these items have been taken as most important items for environmental issues and environmental impact assessment. So what are the items? Whenever you go for these items in Nepal, you have to go for environmental impact assessment. I'm showing in different countries in different way, but the main thing in every country is same. So let's see the what are the stress emphasized point, main point, thrust point in Nepal. See the numbers. These points are industry, tourism, water resources, transportation, urbanization, agriculture, forest, and other developmental projects. All these things, Nepal is taking environmental impact assessment. And in Nepal, there is, see, the government's environmental impact assessment guidelines of 1993 inspired the enactment of Environmental Protection Act, EPA, in 1997, and Environmental Protection Rules, EPR, in 1997 again. And these are also acting for the environmental issues in Nepal. Come to New Zealand. What is happening in New Zealand? In New Zealand, environmental impact issues usually referred to as assessment of environmental effects. So whatever be the terminology doesn't matter, but the main work inside, main spirit is same, that you have to protect your environment, you have to minimize the losses in the ecology or in the environment. The first issue of environmental impact assessment dates back to the cabinet minute passed in 1974 called Environmental Protection and Enhancement Procedure. So I'm talking about New Zealand. They had no legal force and only related to the activities of government departments only. And when the Resource Management Act was passed in 1991, the environmental impact assessment was required as a part of the resource consent application. So this was about New Zealand. Come to Russia. In Russian Federation also Act of 2004, the state authority responsible for conducting the state environmental impact assessment in Russia has been split into two federal bodies. What are these two federal bodies in Russia? Number one, Federal Service for Monitoring the Issue of National Resources, part of the Russian Ministry for Natural Resources and Environment. Federal Service on Ecological and Technological and Nuclear Control. So these broad divisions in the environmental control issues there in Russia, and these two main pieces of environmental legislation there is, one is on ecological expertise in 1995, then regulation of assessment of impact from intended business and other activities on environment in Russian Federation 2000. So Russia is taking a lot of care for environmental protection. Then Sri Lanka, National Environment Act of 1998 requires environmental impact assessment for large-scale projects in sensitive areas. So whenever you go for large-scale projects in sensitive areas in Sri Lanka, the people are going for that, they have to go pass through the National Environmental Act of 1998 guidelines, and it is enforced by the Central Environmental Authority in Sri Lanka. Come to Ukraine. In the process of making managerial decisions about planned activity, the new law of Ukraine on evaluation of impact on surroundings prescribe the requirements of these things. So what are the requirements in environmental issues in Ukraine? Please note, dear students, environmental safety. So you have to give importance to environmental safety whenever you go for some developmental project or infrastructural development. Then rational use of natural resources is the most important thing. National use resources should be rationally used. So this is the most important thing. Every country should do the same thing, and every country has been doing this way or that way. Maybe terminology is different. And because I told you this is a one world, one planet, one plan. So ultimately, it's coming under UNO, and all the countries of the world are facing the same problem, same issue. So I'm talking about Ukraine now, minimizing the harmful impact on surroundings. So whenever you go in Ukraine, whenever people go in Ukraine for managerial decision making about planned activity, you first go for minimizing the harmful impact on surroundings. And see, in Ukraine, I have noted this important point regarding Ukraine. The environment, a business entity is forbidden to conduct or to start its planned activity without the conclusion of impact of surroundings. The most important thing, you have to take consideration about your business activity on of the impact on the surroundings. First, they have to consider the impact of the business activity on the surroundings, and after that, they analyze and assess this impact. That is environmental impact assessment, and after that, business entity will be allowed to be established. So these things about about Ukraine and about the United States, I told you already. The National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, NEPA, enacted in 1970, and there are several other acts in United States of America. And if you're interested, you can go by their environmental acts and issues and protection and environmental assessment rules. But I have found this the most important. The first law, first act that was passed in the United States of America is National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, NEPA, which was enacted in 1970. And the structure of generic environmental assessment in USA is as follows. The environmental assessment, how they do in the assessment report, the dissertation or report, you have to include these things. In USA, they specifically they have given. When you do for PhD, in PhD thesis also you give some segment, some chapterization, so contents. So they are also giving these rules that you have to give these points in your assessment. So what are the points? Summary, introduction, background, purpose and need for action, proposed action, decision framework, public involvement issues, then alternative including proposed action, then alternatives, okay, it is, again printed, then mitigation, common to all alternatives, then comparison of alternatives, then environment consequences, consultation and coordination. All these things have to be taken into consideration in environmental impact assessment. You might have found in the European Union and in UK also these things have been included. And these are the things about environmental impact assessment in different countries. And this is my second video. I've uploaded just now one part one also. If we please go by both the videos. And the thing is that always you remember that whatever I'm presenting here is not all. It's a very insignificant portion of the total knowledge that is there in the actual field. So you are encouraged to study more and go into the depth of India. If you want to study in India, you go for studying in India. In any state of India, you can go for studying in any state of India. If you want to study of other countries, you can do. If you want to study about UNO, what UNO is doing through 17 Sustainable Development Goals, you can go for studying of that also. You can connect UNO issues with India, UNO goals with India, how these are implemented or not, or any country you can compare with India, or you can limit your studies in India itself on any state. It's up to you. But I have opened here a global issue of environmental impact assessment on a global basis, little bit, very briefly, and is a very much part of environmental accounting, and it will lead to our next chapter, environmental auditing. I'll be dealing with environmental auditing in my next video. Until then, stay blessed always, stay fit always, stay safe always, and stay happy always. Thank you very much. Study properly and give importance. Take care of all the members of your family and yourself. Thank you very much.